Hello, everyone. Welcome to the pilot episode of the show.
Blog Talk Radio.
The cycle of tyranny, from liberty to complacency, from complacency to dependency, from dependency to tyranny, from tyranny to revolution, from revolution back to liberty.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show, the pilot episode. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lori. I'm your host. A little bit different than just listening to a show, a little bit more controlled and stuff, so please bear with me. It's July the 10th, 2012. Wasn't really sure what direction to take this show in when I first started it, and so I listened around to some of the different radio shows and tried to see what was going on, what they were talking about, and what was lacking, and that type of thing. After looking into that, I decided at least to start with that I'd get into a couple of issues that don't really seem to be talked about that much. One of the big issues there is that there's two governments in this country, and a lot of people not really aware of that. Wasn't going to get too far down that track in this particular show. Just to throw that out, and later on I'll mention about some documents. Some other things, too. There's a lot of misunderstanding around as far as the 14th Amendment and that type of thing. What it means to be a U.S. citizen. With that, I see we do have a caller in the queue, and I'm pretty sure I know who this is, so let's bring this one in and see who it is. Caller, are you on the air there, 559?
Yes. Hi, my name is Teresa.
Oh, hi, Teresa. Thank you for joining the call this evening.
Uh-huh.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. A little bit nervous doing my first show here and all. Probably survive it, but anyhow, so...
That's understandable.
Do you have any thoughts or questions on that particular statement I just made about
Interested in hearing about the two different kinds of government.
Yeah. So did you have any thoughts or comments or questions about that, or where that may have come from, or how it's come about?
Yeah, maybe how it's come about.
Well, that's actually a rather lengthy history. It's probably going to take several shows. I don't know if you're actually signed in. Actually, I believe you just called in. This is only a half-hour show, so we're kind of limited to how much we can actually get into at one time, but I can try to give you a rough breakdown of how that came to be. A lot of us are taught in school that with the Civil War that was actually to end slavery. That, in actuality, when you start looking into the documentation and the history of it, was really a relatively minor portion of what was going on. What actually had happened is that because of the Revolutionary War, the country actually became bankrupt. They were bankrupt. They borrowed money from overseas, France particularly, actually, most notably. And I don't know how much you know about finances and that type of thing as far as bankruptcy laws where it's with international law, but they actually reset themselves every 70 years. So if you start looking at when the civil... I'm sorry, what?
I just said, oh.
Oh. So if you start looking into bankruptcy laws and what happened in the Civil War and then start adding every 70 years, you start seeing a very interesting pattern. So during the Civil War... the Revolutionary War, as I said, we had borrowed quite a bit of money to fight that war, and France didn't do it because they particularly liked America. They just hated the King of England, and so they said, if you're going to fight him, we'll give you the money to do it with. So we said, okay. So we were actually in debt and couldn't pay it and all that because we were pretty well devastated as a country at that time. So when the Civil War came around, what happened is there was actually a ploy, a plot, whatever you want to call it, to restructure that bankruptcy to actually put liens on the properties of the countries, the states in the South. And the South says, well, wait a minute, I don't think we really like that. And so they use this excuse of slavery. I mean, the bottom line is you can go into history and find out there was slavery in the North. Slavery was actually on its way out anyway, but they used that as an excuse to do that. And so that's what they wanted to do. The North, primarily, they wanted to collateralize those states, their infrastructure, their land, and all that to refinance this bankruptcy. And so that's what we actually had a war on. And when you start looking into the history as far as Lincoln and Grant and them, you find some very interesting things. Obviously, we all were pretty much taught that, Lincoln was killed, assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, so on and so forth. Well, President Lincoln had actually declared what we today call executive orders, but back then they were called field orders. And that's Field Order 100. And that was a declaration of martial law. That's when you have field orders and executive orders when you're under martial law. And he had to do that because obviously we were in civil war, whatever the cause, we were in civil war, and we had to maintain a country to hold it together. Well, after the war was fought, he was actually going to renounce that Field Order 100, and that's why they shot him. But in the meantime, what happened is the South actually left the Congress. This little technical term called sine die. It's Latin. It means without day. They adjourned the what's called the de jure government form that we had, and left without day. They never had a day. We're going to come back, next year at this time. And from that point on, we actually were under martial law, and we have remained there until today. Actually, until about 2010, but that's a whole another story that I'll get into later. So I don't know if you're following that, or if you have any questions or comments on that so far, or
no, that was good.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So anyway, so when this Congress was adjourned sine die without day, we basically lost our republic at that point. And a lot of history you'd have to get into if you're actually interested, but effectively what happened is that the representatives of the South were actually forced at gunpoint, literally by bayonet, to re-adjourn the Congress under martial law, and that is how they've functioned ever since then. Then you move a little bit forward. This was like 1861 time frame. Then in 1871, you find an interesting little thing. You can look it up online if you're interested. It's called the Organic Act of 1871. What you find out is that the United States, all capital letters that we call the United States, Delaware, and they became an actual corporation. And they have functioned as a corporation in that capacity ever since. And in a real sense, what we have is that the Congress that people think of in this Republican form of government, or that we're supposed to have, is actually no more than a board of directors. The president's really the president of the company, and so on and so forth. And so it's really interesting, and I know it sounds bizarre. It sounded really weird to me when I started hearing this thing, but when you start digging up these documents, which I can reference you to some here in a little bit, you find these things to be so once you start finding congressional records and Supreme Court cases and that type of thing. So from 1861, when that became, we lost the republic, if you forward another 70 years, you're into the 1931, 1933 area, and that's when we started having, of course, the Roosevelt era with his New Deal and all that type of thing. And I don't know how much history you studied, but he actually required Americans to turn in their gold. There was some trading going on and this type of thing, and he had required them to turn in their gold, and it was supposed to be just for a short period of time. Well, right after people turned in their gold, not everybody did, but a lot did, they put out, passed a law that it was a federal crime even to ask for your gold back. It was really kind of a strange deal. So, and along at that same time, too, he also did another little act, Roosevelt that is, in 1933, that kind of piggybacked on the Trading with the Enemies Act that went clear back to 1917 in the First World War, that actually defined U.S. citizens as enemies of the state. So I don't know if that helps there. I don't know if it was confusing. I don't know if you'd like some documentation or court case references. I actually have a couple if you'd be interested. I'd be more than happy if you have a pencil and a piece of paper maybe to write them down with, or listen to this recording later that you can look up if you're interested.
Yeah, that would be great. Tell me about them. Or tell me where to find them.
Okay. Well, you can use about any search engine, I suspect, but I use Google. I don't really like them because I know they track and trace us, but they're still probably one of the better search engines out there. There's a Supreme Court case that was decided in 1901, and it's called Downs v. Bidwell. And I don't know if you know anything about court cases and the way they do it, but they give a number afterward. But if you go down v. Bidwell, it should come up, and then the number is actually 182 U.S. 241, and then in parentheses 1901. And if you read that court hearing, you will find that the Supreme Court justices actually determined that there were indeed two simultaneous governments functioning in the what we think of as the United States in America. And one of them, and I have to get a little technical again with the Latin phrases, I'm sorry, but the law is in Latin, kind of like with medical and that type of thing. But there's two forms of government in this respect. There's what they call de jure, and there's what they call de facto. And you can find these in any law book. I like Black's Law Dictionary, a good one. Ballantyne's is another one. There's a few of them out there, and you might want to check with your state laws because some of them use different law books, but Black's is a very common one. And basically what they say is a de facto, it means it's by fact. It appears to be a de jure government, but it's not really the true government. It's not the constitutional government of the land. And then you have the de jure government, which is the constitutional government of the land. And interestingly enough, you look into international law, you'll find they cannot coexist at the same time. That's an interesting fact that we'll get back to, down the road at some point there. But anyway, so when we had this back at the Civil War, and these field orders were instituted and put us under martial law, that's when we actually lost the republic. We went from a republic de jure government into a de facto martial law government. And like I say, you will find that in this case, Downs v. Bidwell. It's a fairly known case for people that have looked into this. So did that help to answer some of those questions?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Take a pop down here and see if anybody else popped in on the chat room. Okay. Not everybody calls in. Sometimes people just sit on the outside and they'll listen and they don't really want to get in. I've done this a few times myself. So anyhow, yeah. So that's how we ended up with this two forms of government, and this is why a lot of people, when they go into courtrooms, they don't really understand what's going on. I mean, you know, we all pretty much have this sense of what's right and what's wrong and what's fair, and you know, and we come out of courtrooms sometimes just shaking our head, going, "Wow, how did I get railroaded?" Well, that brings to another subject that a lot of people don't understand, and that's called the international law of the flag. And there's actual laws. You can look that up. If you Google that, international law of the flag, you'll find there's a whole slew of codes and laws on that, what type of flag, how it's displayed, and this and that, and what they all mean, and this type of thing. And it goes back to the days when we did a lot of merchants were on the old wooden masted vessels. When you stepped on board that ship, they had that flag up there on top of the mast, and by stepping on board that and seeing that flag, you were acknowledging that you would be judged by those laws, whatever they were. If it was a French flag, it'd be by French law. If it was a U.S. flag, it'd be by U.S., and so on and so forth. And something else that happened too with this martial law, that a lot of people today, I don't think, really pay much attention. They don't really know. But if you go into any federal building, you go into any courtroom, and a lot of schools even these days, even a lot of churches, will display a gold-fringed flag. It looks like the U.S. flag, but it has gold fringe around it. And a lot of people think, oh, that's just pretty, that's nice decoration. Well, legally, it has a bit more significance than that. That gold fringe flag is what's referred to as an Admiralty Maritime Law flag. It's a martial law flag is what it is. It's a battle flag. And when you operate under that flag, you really have no right. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, any legislation passed by Congress is pushed aside. And so you really don't have those. And this is why a lot of judges, people come out and go, you know, that I was trying to tell them one of my constitutional rights, and he's telling me to shut up. If you talk about your constitutional rights again, I'm going to throw you in jail. And I'm going, what's going on? Well, there is no constitution under a martial law. And that's what that flag signifies. And as I said, you can find that under, if you start looking up, you can either Google or whatever search engine, you know, maritime law flag, or you can just go directly to international law of the flag and find that. So has any of this kind of weirded you out? I mean, have you heard any of this stuff before, or you hadn't heard any of it, or?
I've heard some of it before, but a lot of this is new to me, so it's interesting.
Okay. So, anyway, yeah, this is the type of thing that I was thinking about covering in this show, and I have the potential ability to possibly get some special guests on that have actually dealt with these types of things. And that could end up being a real treat if I can get someone to come on the show, which I would really like. One other document that I'd like to reference here, again, if you're ready to write, it's called HJR 192. And that was done in 1933, also under President then Roosevelt. And do you remember I was telling you that during the Civil War they were trying to collateralize all the monies and stuff, the properties, to be able to redo this debt?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they did do that. They did it by force. Well, now we're 70 years later, 1931, in that time frame, and so we had to do that debt again. And this is what I was saying earlier about Roosevelt basically said that, you know, Americans had to turn in their gold, and then shortly afterwards he passed another little proclamation, that's number 2039 if you're interested, that actually declared a bank holiday, and that's the one that declared the citizens as enemies of the state. But anyway, so this HJR 192 in 1933, if you start looking at that, it starts talking about these things called remedy. And at first, if somebody's not familiar with the law, they might be going, remedy? What's remedy? Well, in law, if you put somebody in a position legally, there has to be a remedy. In other words, there has to be a way for them to get out of it, be it to pay or to spend time in jail or to work for you. There has to be a remedy to eliminate that problem, that conflict in law. Well, when they collateralized the people's property, their land, after the Civil War there, they basically were taking possession. They became a fiduciary of that property, of all that property. And so because they were, in effect, seizing property, even though people were still allowed to live on their land, they didn't really have possession of it, so there has to be a remedy. And this is what one of the things that Roosevelt did in 1933, along with several other things, but I'll try to go one thing at a time here, because this is pretty complicated sometimes. If you look in that HJR 192, you'll find that there was a remedy done. And what that allows is it's a means for people to what they call discharge debt. Now, I don't believe you're probably old enough. A lot of us anymore aren't. But back in the day, we used to have gold and silver certificates. Maybe you've seen pictures of them. But it says right on there, payable upon demand to bearer, and whatever it was in silver or gold, there was a silver or gold certificate. You could take that into a bank and point in your hand, and they had to give you whatever the exchange rate was silver for that bill. Well, when we had all this 1933, they turned into gold. They did away with that. And from that point on, we do not actually pay our debts in the conventional sense. We don't really buy things. It's called a discharge of debt. So that's what this remedy is that's talking about here in this HJR 192. Now, I know I'm probably getting pretty in-depth. I know I've thrown a lot of stuff out here, and I don't really mean to do that, but it's kind of hard to do as well. I mean, if you're going to discuss this subject, I guess I could probably lay it out a little bit better, but there's a lot of little barbs and a lot of little bunny trails along the way here. And so I'm hoping you've been able to follow so far, and if that helps, or if you have any comments or questions so far.
Not from me right now. This is Teresa.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for being here and calling in on the line, Teresa. I appreciate that. Nice to have a little support on my first maiden voyage. But
Good.
yeah, that's two pretty big subjects there that I was thinking that I would probably look more in depth, refresh myself, and if anybody on some of these calls was interested, we can drill right down into the particulars if they would be interested in something like that at all. Let me see. Some other subjects that I thought I might address to kind of tie into this. The Constitution we have today, because of all these changes with the de jure, de facto, martial law, the Constitution we have today is not exactly the same as what it was originally. And I don't mean the same just that there have been amendments. added and that type of thing because that was a provision of the original Constitution. In fact, it was a requirement. Some didn't want to sign it if it couldn't be amended. And so they made that allowance to be able to amend it. But when we had this martial law thing and back with the Revolutionary War, the records building was actually burned down. You can go back in history and check that out. And one of the reasons is it was actually England that wanted that. And one of the reasons is, and it's still reflected to a lesser degree in this modern-day Constitution, there's a little clause. I'm sorry I don't have the exact article right now, but we can look that up in a little bit. It talks about titles of nobility and how you cannot have no titles of nobility. Well, what's nobility? Nobility, noble, that's having to do with a king. Well, we don't have kings in this country, at least used to didn't, but so a lot of these titles that, you know, dukes and earls, sirs, knights, esquires, a lot of people are not even aware that esquire is actually a title of nobility, as is sir. Sir is actually one step below a knight. A lot of people don't know that because it's not in our normal vocabulary. We use sir in a different way, and that's one of the ways that we really get hurt legally, is that some of the words we use in a certain way day in and day out are completely different than the way they're used in courtrooms. And so, and that gets into a whole other, you know, bailiwick here as far as with laws being private. I'm sure you've probably heard of a barred attorney. You know, if they're bar, well, bar is actually an acronym, and it's the British Accreditation Registry, which kind of surprises a lot of people that it would be tied into Britain, but it is, and those laws are actually private. A lot of people think of as all these statutory laws, they think that they're public laws. Well, they're not. And that's why attorneys have to pay bar association dues. If you don't believe that, pick up a statute book one day and flip to the second page on there, and you'll find LexisNexis, and you'll see it's copywritten. So what they're really doing with their bar dues, association dues, is they're actually paying for the privilege of using private laws that are affiliated with England. Doesn't that sound kind of strange?
Yes, it does.
Yes. And I see we're down to about 2 minutes, so I'll probably throw this out real quick, and then I'll probably wrap up for this show. Even the word attorney is very strange. It comes from a French word, attorn. And if you look that French word up in an etymological dictionary, you'll find an attorn was somebody like a tax collector that went out for the king. He would go out and take possessions from people and attorn them back to the king. And in like manner, we have that to this day. There's a dual oath that attorneys take, one to the court and one to their client. And if there's a conflict, their primary is to the court. And if you ask them that and they're being truthful, most of them will actually tell you that that is so. Anyhow, we've got about a minute left here, so I'll ask you, Teresa, if you had any more questions or comments before the end of this show here.
No, I don't think I have any more questions, but I found the information about the gold-frilled flag to be an interesting note. But, yes, everything was quite informative.
Okay, well, if you're interested in it, look into it. You'll find Eisenhower actually had a lot to do with that. But look into it, and if you enjoyed the show, by all means come back next week, and we can pick up here or one of the other subjects, and we'll try to hone it down to whatever it is that we can get out and learn from this. So thank you again for calling, and hopefully we will see you next week.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.
All righty. You have a good day. Bye-bye.